Hi! So as the title of this video says, I failed. Now, to say that I have failed is something that is very difficult for anybody, especially somebody who has a tendency to be as big-headed and as full of themselves as I do. But let me explain what I mean by this. So, this YouTube channel originally started as a means for me to share videos and photos and adventures from a very specific thing that I did about a year ago. And I went to Skagway, Alaska to work on the White Pass and Yukon Route Railroad. Why I went to Alaska is a whole other story. But simply put, I went to Alaska because I thought that that would be my best way of making my hopes and dreams for my life happen. I thought that I could run off to Alaska and all of my problems that I had had and have had reoccurring throughout my life would magically go away. Not only did I fail, but I was wrong. And as you can see, I'm not in Alaska. I am currently sitting in my bedroom at the house that I rent in Boone, North Carolina, talking to a cell phone about what a failure I am. At least that's what it looks like on the surface. But I feel like it's time that I talk about what happened in Alaska, what I learned, and where I'm going from here. So what happened in Alaska? Well, I flew all the way from Charleston, South Carolina to Juneau. And then I took a ferry from Juneau to Skagway. And I was so excited. I was hyped. I was hopped up like you would not believe. The entire trip to Juneau, and then the entire trip to Skagway. When the boat arrived in Skagway, and we had finally moored up to the dock, and I walk into the ferry depot in Skagway, Alaska to meet my new boss and begin this new adventure, something hit me like a ton of bricks. You could call it anxiety. Some may call it a premonition. Some may call it the Holy Spirit, whatever. But something hit me like a ton of bricks whenever I got off the boat in Skagway, and that ton of bricks was, what have I done? What have I done? What have I done traveling 3,000 miles away from everybody that I know, everybody that I love, and now I'm here all by myself in a strange new place that I know nothing about, and I am now completely on my own. And truth be told, the minute I got off that boat, my very first thought was tucking my tail and running back home. Now, I didn't do that. No, instead what I did was I decided I was going to commit. I committed to what I had done. Albeit, at this point, a little less enthusiastically than I had originally jumped into this. It didn't take me long to figure out that White Pass is a very different kind of tourist railroad. Now, of course, other people had tried to warn me about this, but of course, me being the kind of person that I am, I didn't really take their warnings to much heart. I had assumed that with other places that I've worked and other things that I've done and years that I've spent doing some paid work with Heritage Railroad equipment and volunteering with other organizations, that I pretty much knew what I was doing. And we'll talk more about that later. But as my time in Skagway progressed, and I did not personally progress through the training program at White Pass, my manager and I had a great little talk, and we mutually came to the conclusion that White Pass was not right for me. Maybe not right for me in that moment, maybe not right for me ever. But I left that meeting knowing two things. That, well, for one, I was going to go back home, which is something that I had wanted since I got off the boat. And for two, this is going to be a really interesting story for the folks whenever I get back there. So what did I learn? First thing that I learned is that I did not know as much as I thought I did. Now, this was evident to me as I was, struggling to keep up with the rest of my class in the training program. And it was also said to me verbally by somebody who I was working with, and he is still someone who I greatly respect. I knew that he did not mean it in any kind of malicious way. And I won't name him, but he knows who he is. One day, after a really rough day, and I was just really in my feelings about a lot of stuff, he just looked at me and goes, "You know something? You just really do not know as much as you think you do." And in that moment, it kind of caught me off guard because I'm like, first of all, why are you reading my thoughts? And then second of all, like, you're right. I don't know as much as I thought I did. I went into this thinking, oh yeah, I've worked with railroad equipment before. I've worked with trains before. I've even worked for a federally regulated railroad before. Nothing quite like this, though. See, White Pass hauls more people in one day than most tourist railroads, museums, haul in months. They haul thousands of people in a day, coming off these ships, getting on these trains, and going way off into the forests of Alaska and British Columbia. And I thought that I knew what I was doing until it came time to do some real railroading. And I mean real railroading. There was a lot of different things that I had never come in contact with before arriving at White Pass, and the mentality was totally different. There's not a lot of people who work at White Pass who are also rail fans. The mentality is very much, this is a job, and you have a job to get done. And so, needless to say, I did not know as much as I thought I did. And of course, with me being the kind of stubborn, big-headed person that I am, thinking, well, I know how to do most of this stuff, and then being thrown into an environment where I did not know the proper hand signals, the proper radio procedures, the proper anything. I very quickly realized that I was wrong about a lot of what I thought. And by the time that I got around to correcting some of these things, it was already a little late in the program. Second thing that I learned, and it's kind of broken up into three different parts, I am unfit. I am unfit both physically, spiritually, and mentally for what I was attempting to do. Physically unfit in that, and I'm very self-conscious about this. It's not easy to talk about, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there, because Lord knows it's not a secret. I weigh every bit of 320 pounds. Now, I've not always been fat, but years of neglecting my own personal needs, not taking care of myself the way that I was supposed to, just all in all, not taking care of my body has resulted in me being very, very physically unfit. I am fat. My joints hurt because they're carrying around way more weight than they were ever meant to. I'm not as flexible and I'm not as limber as I would need to be to perform a lot of the tasks that I had to perform while I was up there. I'm not able to move very quickly. My response timing hasn't been great. You know, a lot of things that somebody in their mid-20s should be able to do, I was not, and in a lot of ways still am not able to do. So, I'm unfit physically. Spiritually, spiritually and mentally kind of blend together. Whenever I went to White Pass, I had become completely disconnected by everything that brings me peace and brings me strength. I was totally disconnected from my church. I was totally disconnected from my friends, my family, my mountains. I wasn't praying. I wasn't reading my Bible. I had no connection to the things that bring me strength and the things that bring me peace. And so when you're disconnected from those things, and then you're thrown into an alien environment where you're already, not doing great for aforementioned listed reasons, it's going to mess you up a little bit. Now, I did figure out the spiritual and fitness fairly quick, and I did begin trying to reestablish, finding strength in God and finding strength in my spirit that, helped. Especially towards the end of my time there, I actually started to straighten up and fly right there for a minute, as I had began praying and trying to pay more attention to the things that bring me strength. But it was too little too late at that point. I was already so far behind, and with the way that place operates, you do not have the luxury of time. Time is an abstract concept in Alaska because, there's just so much to do. The days are long. The sun never goes down, even in Skagway. So, while I probably needed the blessing of time to get myself adjusted, I didn't have it. And then thirdly, mentally, I was unfit. I have a lot of unresolved issues up until that point, and I've spent the last year working on a lot of those things. A lot of insecurities, but I still have to work through those things. So mentally, I was very anxious, I was worried, I was going through some depressive episodes, and I was not able to stay focused on what I needed to be focused on, and thank God, nothing bad happened. Because whenever you're on a railroad, if your mind is not there in that moment where you and this piece of equipment that weighs as much as a small house moving 30 miles an hour is, it won't hurt you, it will kill you. And luckily, I never got so bad that, something bad happened. Thank God nothing bad happened. But the potential was there. So my mentality was very much off. I went into this thinking, this is going to be some great big grand adventure, and this is going to be how I catapult my career into the next phase. And I was so busy focused on what came after White Pass, what came later, and then whenever I got to White Pass, I was so focused on I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to go home. Well, Sparky, you got your wish. You got to go back home. But you got to go back home looking like a scalded dog in front of God and everybody. So, thing number 2, I'm unfit. That's not an easy thing to admit, but it's the truth. Thing number 3 I learned from my time at White Pass and in Alaska, I make bad mistakes. I'm impulsive. I don't always think things through. I make bad mistakes. That does not make me a bad person. And that might sound like, well, no duh, but it really is something that I struggle with, because I I am my own worst critic. Nobody on the planet will give me more of an atomic butt chewing than I can give myself. I am very, very hard on myself. And whenever I left White Pass and me and my manager had our conversation where we mutually concluded that this was just not going to work out, he wrote me up a letter of recommendation where he said, you know, he's not bad. He does a great job. He's very dedicated to wanting to learn this specific craft. And he ended his recommendation letter for me with, and he is a fine young man. And that really resonated with me, because that was the first time that I had ever heard someone who wasn't like a blood relative or a friend, someone who had never known me before this experience, say, "You're a fine young man. There's nothing wrong with you. You yourself are not defective." That same coworker and that same friend who I mentioned earlier that just was very blunt and very honest, and I still think the world of him, said something similar along those lines. He was like, you know, there is one thing that sets you apart from the average foamer. And for those of y'all who aren't in the know, foamer is kind of a derogatory term for somebody who likes trains. But he said, there's something that separates you from the average foamer, and that's that you will actually sit down and listen. You won't get super defensive. You won't try to talk back. Whenever somebody's trying to give you correction, you'll take it. And he said, and that really resonated with him. And he said, I know you'll go to some great places. Maybe not here. Maybe you'll come back here. I don't know. And he said, but I'll be watching your career with great interest. And when the time comes, you can put me down as a reference. Not for your next job, but when you have finally gotten to the place where you know that you'll really knock it out of the park. And he gave me his phone number, and he said, whenever you're ready, feel free to ask, and I'll gladly be willing to give you a reference. And so that really kind of solidified that I make bad mistakes, but that does not make me a bad person. So, where do I go from here? Honestly, I'm glad that I got the experience. Yeah, I made a fool of myself. I made this big deal. Hey, everybody, I'm going to Alaska. And then it blew up in my face, figuratively. And you know, I'm glad I got the experience. And truthfully, I'm glad that I left when I did, and here is why. Everything happens for a reason. 2 months after I got back from Skagway, the worst natural disaster to ever hit my home, Hurricane Helene, happened. It was actually almost 3 months to the day, actually closer to 3 months to the day, that I had left Skagway. Hurricane Helene hit. And for a week, there was no way of getting communication in or out. And we'll make a Hurricane Helene video, and I'll tell you my story of that day. But when Hurricane Helene hit, there was no effective way of getting real communication in or out of my hometown. Cell phone towers were destroyed. There was no internet. There was no power. There was no plumbing. The town of Boone, one of the largest towns in our area, had no water, and it was full of people, and it was just a worst case scenario. That hurricane could not have hit at a worst possible time. And I could only imagine what I would have done if I were all the way up in Skagway and had no way of knowing if my folks were alive or dead. I would have gone insane. I would have. If I had been in Skagway whenever Hurricane Helene hit, I would have had to have been flown to Juneau to go to the hospital for a mental breakdown. Because I was close to it while I was here. And I was seeing everything. I couldn't imagine being all the way up in Alaska, and the only word I got from back home was conspiracy theories being shared around on TikTok, stories of bodies being found in trees and babies floating down rivers. I am very blessed that I got to be here for that, as opposed to being half across the world away. So if nothing else, I got to be home whenever home needed me to be here. And so now, all that said, where do I go from here? I may be down, but I'm not out. As long as there's breath in my body, there is always hope. I have been through much worse circumstances in my life. I have made much bigger mistakes. I have failed much harder, just not as publicly. As long as there is life in my body, as long as there is breath in my lungs, there is hope. I may be down, but I'm not out. I've learned from my experiences. And I've decided that I'm going to begin the process of completely rebuilding everything that I had lost, given up on. I'm going to take my life back. I'm going to fix those 3 things that really messed me up while I was up there. And I'm going to keep trying. You know, I have a young fella who considers me something of a mentor. And whenever he was going through his ground school training at Norfolk Southern, he said, I want to give up. I want to give up. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And I said, look, failure is nothing to be ashamed of, but quitting is. You cannot give up. You can whine, bellyache, and cuss the whole way, but you cannot give up. So I think it's time I take my own advice. I'm not going to give up. So I want to invite y'all along on my journey as I go and I work on some of the different things that I'm trying to do to improve my life, to improve the way that I am, to improve the person that I am. And I want to take y'all with me. Now, if you stuck along this long, you're probably thinking one of 2 things. You're either thinking, well, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. You might be laughing, you might be snickering, and I know that there's a few people out there who would love to see me fall again, who think that it's just hilarious. And you know what? If you're one of those people, please keep watching. Please. Because if I do fail, you get to have the comedy. For some people, this story is a comedy. I would like to consider this my comeback story. And if you're here, and everybody loves a good comeback story, but if you're here and you want to see me come back from a failure, and if you want to see somebody in real time try to take the pieces of their very broken life and put them back together, I invite you to join me. So, I failed, but I'm not giving up. And I'll talk to y'all later.